Henry and Melissa Johnson were the couple everyone in Maplewood Estates admired, but behind their warm smiles and ordinary routines, a darkness was closing in that would end with a brutal double murder and leave their quiet Florida neighborhood stunned. Maplewood Estates had always been a place where neighbors waved to each other, children played freely in front yards, and the hum of lawnmowers on weekend mornings created a sense of calm. It was the kind of neighborhood where families felt safe leaving their doors unlocked, where summer barbecues and holiday gatherings were traditions passed down through the years. On the surface, it was a perfect picture of suburban life, the kind of place that rarely made headlines. But on that sweltering summer evening, the quiet rhythm of Maplewood Estates was shattered in the most horrifying way imaginable. It began with a flicker of unease, something so subtle that many residents initially ignored it. Streetlights reflected off a sheen of humidity, and the cicada's song seemed louder than usual, almost urgent. Then came the flashing lights. Red and blue reflected across the pavement as police vehicles and ambulances swarmed the cul-de-sac where the Johnson family lived. Sirens cut through the otherwise silent neighborhood, a sound so foreign that children stopped playing and adults froze on their porches, unsure of what they were witnessing. Whispers began almost immediately, growing louder with every passing minute. People speculated about what could have happened. A burglary gone wrong? A domestic dispute? Nothing prepared them for the truth. Inside the Johnson home, the scene was one of chaos and terror. Henry and Melissa Johnson, the couple who had seemed so ordinary, so approachable, were found dead. The attack had been brutal and swift, leaving their home in disarray. Furniture was overturned, and the signs of a violent struggle were unmistakable. The quiet suburban facade that residents had clung to so firmly crumbled in an instant, replaced by shock and disbelief. Neighbors who had known the Johnsons for years struggled to reconcile the friendly smiles and polite greetings with the horrifying reality inside their home. As police cordoned off the area, the street transformed into a stage for emergency response teams. Forensic units moved with precision, photographing every surface, dusting for fingerprints, and collecting evidence that would later become critical in piecing together what had happened. Detectives questioned neighbors, seeking anyone who might have noticed unusual activity, any fleeting sign that something terrible was about to occur. The neighborhood's sense of security evaporated with each inquiry, replaced by a gnawing suspicion that danger could lurk anywhere, even behind familiar doors. Social media became a mirror reflecting the community's collective fear. Rumors and speculation spread like wildfire, fueled by the natural human desire to make sense of senseless violence. Posts appeared almost instantly, with neighbors sharing anything they thought might be a clue. Strange cars seen near the Johnson home, unfamiliar faces wandering the streets, even fleeting arguments overheard days earlier. The story of Maplewood Estates' sudden descent into horror became a point of obsession. People who had once taken comfort in the monotony of their lives were now hyper-aware of every sound, every shadow. By the time the sun had set and the night settled over the neighborhood, Maplewood Estates was no longer a haven. It had been transformed into a place of questions and fear, where every knock at the door or rustle in the trees reminded residents that their world was not as safe as they had believed. The brutal deaths of Henry and Melissa Johnson were not just a tragedy for their family. They were a rupture in the fabric of the community itself, a chilling reminder that violence could strike even in the most idyllic of places. The quiet streets that once symbolized safety now carried the weight of grief, suspicion, and the terrifying unknown. Henry and Melissa Johnson had lived in Maplewood Estates for nearly a decade, and during that time they had become fixtures in the community. Henry was a high school teacher, known for his dedication to his students and his willingness to stay after hours to help anyone who needed guidance. His colleagues spoke highly of his calm demeanor, patience, and ability to connect with even the most difficult students. Outside of work, Henry enjoyed quiet evenings in his backyard, tending to a small garden he had cultivated with meticulous care. Neighbors often saw him jogging in the early mornings, headphones in, lost in thought, waving politely to anyone he passed. There was something grounding about him, a stability that made him someone people instinctively trusted. Melissa, on the other hand, was a nurse at a local hospital, respected by her peers for her expertise and compassion. She often took on extra shifts when the hospital was short-staffed and volunteered at community health clinics on weekends. Her warmth was evident in the way she interacted with patients, and she had a reputation for going out of her way to make others feel safe and cared for. At home, Melissa was the heart of the family. She decorated the house with care, made sure neighbors' children were welcome in the yard, and coordinated small gatherings that brought the community together. Together, Henry and Melissa seemed to embody everything Maplewood Estates represented: kindness, stability, and a sense of responsibility to the people around them. Despite their outwardly calm lives, subtle tensions had begun to surface. Henry had recently become involved in a dispute at school regarding a controversial project he had been leading with his students. While nothing had escalated publicly, colleagues described heated exchanges and mounting frustration over differing opinions. Melissa had also experienced her own share of conflicts, having reported suspicious activity at the hospital that had made her feel uneasy. While these incidents appeared minor in isolation, they hinted at a life under pressure where stress and unease were quietly building beneath the surface. Neighbors struggled to reconcile the image of the Johnsons with the violent reality of their deaths. How could such kind, ordinary people have met such a fate? Friends and family described them as careful, thoughtful, and unlikely to provoke anyone intentionally. There were no known enemies, no glaring signs of danger. Yet the investigation would later reveal small cracks in the lives they had meticulously maintained. Interactions that, at the time, seemed inconsequential, but would become critical pieces of the puzzle. Community members began to piece together the Johnsons' routines, trying to find patterns that might explain the attack. They remembered late-night walks Henry sometimes took to clear his mind, the way Melissa would stop to talk to neighbors during her errands, and the quiet weekend mornings they spent tending to chores. Each detail, once mundane, now felt laden with significance. The very predictability of their lives made the violence all the more shocking, as if someone had exploited their trust and familiarity with the neighborhood. The realization settled over Maplewood Estates like a heavy fog. Tragedy could strike anyone, even those who seemed safest, and no life, no matter how ordinary, was immune to the darkness that could lurk nearby. The image of Henry and Melissa, devoted to each other and their community, contrasted painfully with the scene that investigators discovered in their home. Their lives, once symbols of calm and normalcy, had become a haunting reminder of vulnerability, forcing neighbors to confront an uncomfortable truth. Evil could exist in the most familiar places, quietly waiting to destroy everything they held dear. The investigation into the Johnsons' deaths began almost immediately, with detectives arriving at the scene while the neighborhood was still in shock. The house itself told a story of chaos and violence. Living room furniture was overturned, drawers had been rifled through, and blood stained the carpet in jagged patterns that suggested a struggle. Officers moved methodically, documenting every detail, photographing the scene from every angle, and collecting anything that might serve as evidence. Forensic teams worked tirelessly, analyzing fingerprints, DNA samples, and other trace evidence that could help identify the perpetrator. Even small details, a shoe print in the mud outside, a broken vase, were treated as potential clues. Neighbors were questioned one by one, detectives looking for anyone who might have seen or heard something unusual in the hours leading up to the murders. Many described nothing more than the typical sounds of a quiet evening, but some recalled glimpses of a shadowy figure moving along the street or an unfamiliar car parked near the Johnson home. While these accounts were fragmented and often contradictory, investigators filed each report carefully, understanding that even the smallest observation could become crucial in building a timeline. The detectives were aware that they were searching for someone who knew the victims or had observed them closely, someone whose presence in the neighborhood would not be entirely surprising. Digital evidence became another key component of the investigation. The Johnsons' phone records, emails, and social media accounts were examined for any indication of threats, unusual interactions, or plans that might have put them at risk. Surveillance footage from nearby homes offered glimpses of movement, though much of it was obstructed or unclear. A figure was seen leaving the Johnson property late at night, their features obscured by shadows, but the image was enough to confirm the presence of someone who should not have been there. Detectives pored over this footage repeatedly, searching for any identifying details, and cross-referenced it with other pieces of evidence collected from the scene. As the days passed, investigators began to rule out potential motives that initially seemed likely. Nothing appeared to have been stolen, eliminating robbery as a reason for the attack. There were no signs of a break-in that suggested random violence. This pointed toward a personal connection, someone who had grievances, obsession, or resentment toward the Johnsons. Interviews with friends, family, and colleagues provided context, revealing minor conflicts and disputes that had seemed insignificant at the time. Each new detail helped narrow the focus, guiding detectives toward the realization that this was not a crime of opportunity, but a calculated act of aggression. The community followed the investigation closely, sharing tips and theories, but the complexity of the case left everyone uneasy. As police worked tirelessly, they discovered that subtle inconsistencies in witness statements and surveillance footage suggested someone in Maplewood Estates might have been hiding crucial information. Detectives began connecting dots between unrelated events, odd behaviors, fleeting sightings, and the couple's recent disputes, and slowly a clearer picture of what had happened began to emerge. Every piece of evidence, no matter how small, brought investigators one step closer to uncovering the shocking truth behind the brutal double murder. And the realization settled over the neighborhood that the person responsible had been lurking in plain sight all along. As the investigation progressed, detectives began uncovering layers of the Johnsons' lives that had gone unnoticed by neighbors and friends. At first glance, the couple appeared to live a simple, orderly life, but closer examination revealed complexities and hidden tensions. Henry's recent disputes at school, once dismissed as minor disagreements over curriculum choices, now took on a more significant weight. Colleagues spoke of arguments that had become increasingly heated, involving not just professional differences, but personal criticisms that left Henry frustrated and, at times, anxious. Melissa's experiences at the hospital also gained renewed attention. The suspicious activity she had reported months earlier now seemed more ominous, raising questions about whether someone connected to those events had harbored a grudge or felt provoked by her actions. Detectives discovered that both Henry and Melissa had been meticulous about documenting their routines and interactions. Their schedules were predictable, their habits consistent, and their movements around the neighborhood familiar to anyone paying attention. While this predictability had once been a comforting feature of their lives, it now painted a different picture, one in which someone with knowledge of their habits could plan an attack with chilling precision. Investigators found notes on Melissa's phone, cryptic messages that hinted at a growing unease, references to someone watching or following them, and mentions of feelings of being unsafe. These details suggested that the couple had sensed a threat, even if they had not fully understood its magnitude. As the detectives sifted through these new findings, they began to identify patterns that linked the Johnsons' lives to a broader web of suspicion. Alibis were examined, relationships scrutinized, and behaviors analyzed for inconsistencies. One neighbor, who initially seemed harmless, emerged as someone who had been unusually attentive to the Johnsons' routines. Surveillance footage, once inconclusive, now revealed subtle movements, a figure appearing at odd hours near the house, lingering longer than necessary, as if observing without being noticed. Interviews with other residents revealed fleeting moments that had seemed trivial at the time, strange conversations, unexplained visits, and an unnerving curiosity about the couple's comings and goings. The deeper the detectives delved, the more it became apparent that this was not a spontaneous act of violence. The attack had been meticulously planned, executed by someone who had studied the Johnsons, understood their vulnerabilities, and waited for the perfect opportunity. Each new discovery reinforced the theory that the perpetrator was someone within the neighborhood, someone who had leveraged the familiarity and trust that the Johnsons had placed in their community. What had once been ordinary interactions, waves across the street, casual greetings, shared community events, now took on a sinister undertone. The unraveling of these hidden truths left the neighborhood in a state of unease and disbelief. Families who had once felt safe began scrutinizing their own surroundings, questioning the intentions of those they had trusted for years. Maplewood Estates, which had prided itself on openness and friendliness, was now grappling with suspicion, fear, and a sense of betrayal. The detectives, methodical and unyielding, continued to piece together the fragments of evidence, knowing that each revelation brought them closer to exposing the individual who had infiltrated the Johnsons' lives and executed a crime so calculated it left the entire community questioning the very nature of trust and safety in their once idyllic neighborhood. After weeks of painstaking investigation, the detectives finally reached a breakthrough that would bring clarity to the horror that had gripped Maplewood Estates. DNA evidence recovered from the scene, combined with digital footprints and surveillance footage, pointed to a single suspect, a neighbor who had lived just a few houses away from the Johnsons. The individual had gone to extraordinary lengths to observe the couple, memorizing their routines and movements. What had seemed like ordinary curiosity or friendly interest was, in reality, a dangerous obsession that had been simmering beneath the surface for months. Detectives quickly obtained a warrant, and the arrest sent shockwaves through the community. Families who had waved to the suspect daily now struggled to reconcile the friendly facade with the chilling reality. The motive was revealed during the initial stages of the investigation. Jealousy and resentment had driven the neighbor to plan the attack with precision. The Johnsons' seemingly ordinary life, their kindness, success, and stability had become a source of fixation. Each detail of their daily routine had been catalogued: when they left for work, when they returned home, and even the patterns of their evening walks. The perpetrator had waited for a moment when the house was most vulnerable, striking with a methodical and ruthless efficiency. The meticulous nature of the crime stunned the police, who had seen cases of impulsive violence, but rarely such calculated malice within a suburban neighborhood. As the arrest unfolded, Maplewood Estates was gripped by disbelief. Neighbors reflected on subtle signs they had overlooked: the way the suspect lingered near the Johnsons' property, the odd questions about their schedules, the friendly yet intrusive presence in social gatherings. Hindsight transformed ordinary interactions into ominous warnings that had gone unheeded. The realization that someone living among them could harbor such darkness forced residents to confront a terrifying truth. Appearances could be deceiving, and even the most familiar faces could conceal deadly intent. The trial that followed revealed the depth of the perpetrator's planning and the extent of their obsession. Evidence presented in court painted a chilling portrait of premeditation, with every step carefully calculated to avoid detection. The community listened intently as prosecutors detailed the timeline, the surveillance, and the communications that led to the attack. While justice moved forward in the courtroom, the emotional aftermath extended far beyond legal proceedings. Families struggled to process the betrayal and the violence that had invaded their once safe streets. The Johnsons' surviving relatives, devastated by the loss, received support from neighbors who had once shared carefree afternoons and holiday celebrations. In the months after the arrest, Maplewood Estates began to rebuild a sense of security. Neighborhood watch programs were established, community meetings increased, and residents remained vigilant, determined not to allow fear to dominate their lives. The brutal double murder became a somber touchstone, a story shared in hushed tones that reminded everyone that safety could never be taken for granted. Yet amid the grief and unease, the memory of Henry and Melissa Johnson endured. Their lives, devoted to family, community, and kindness, left a lasting impression. While the events had shaken the neighborhood to its core, the collective resilience of the residents slowly restored a sense of trust and purpose, ensuring that the tragedy, though unforgettable, would not define the community's future.